I'm Brenda Romines, and I'm the principal at Bell Street Middle School, and we obviously are an IQMS school, and we just kind of, this session will be a little bit different than the other ones that I've been in, because we just kind of want to tell our story, and it's really on how we try to funnel in and focus on one thing, because I think a lot of times as schools, we have so many problems and so many areas that we need to fix that when we just start trying to attack all of them, we lose our rhyme and reason, and nothing really gets accomplished. We're just putting like Band-Aids on sores and not really treating the illnesses. Bell Street is a middle school in Clinton, and we have 720 students. We're grades 6 through 8, and it doesn't snow very often in Clinton, so when it did this year, I made my husband take me out to the school so I could take pictures, and so I decided that any presentation that I did, I was going to use the snow picture. Do is you'll hear about how to plan and organize a year-long professional development guide for disciplinary literacy across content areas and how to sustain those practices all year long. And then hear ideas about implementing strategies from how we field tested the strategies to how we evaluated the student progress on the strategies. Keeping in mind that, we wanted to increase our STEM instruction and that it was going to be an instructional focus. Like Edith Ann said, we are a TAP school, which is the Teacher Advancement Program, and then we came on with IQMS, and we have a few other things that we're part of too. And when I go to sessions, one of the first things I do is go online and look up like how is the school really doing, and so if you go and look us up, we're an average school. We're slowly making progress. We've been way worse in the past, but we certainly have room to grow. So trying to figure out how we can stick within this model of purposeful reading, meaningful writing, and productive dialogue. So hopefully throughout today we'll be able to show you how we use the data to determine our needs. That's what drives everything. And then talk about how our leadership team brainstormed what we wanted to work on, coming up with a long-range plan, and then field testing, and then helping teachers implement the strategies. Because giving them a notebook and saying, go implement the strategies, well, we all know where that gets us. What's not monitored isn't done. So it's sometimes easy when you can hold hands and jump in together and everybody's doing it together. And then we'll show you some sample student work and some lessons. And I don't know how to make these better. These are just pictures. I don't know if lighting will help. But the first step is really looking at your data. And I'm going to show you pictures of data. I will upload this or I will email it to any of you. But a lot of times as principals, we know the data and we own the data because our name's beside it that everybody in the whole world can see when they click on that little button for the report card on the State Department. But no one else's name is on that, is there, other than your board chair. So it's the principal's name and the board chair. But as principals, we know the data, we know the strengths, we know the weaknesses, but we got to help teachers own it. And so the first thing that we should do is, if we set goals the year before, go back to those goals. Did we meet those goals? Where did we improve? Where did we not improve? And these are just pictures of what our goals were for each grade level. And then this handwriting here is, so this was 2012, and this was how we did in 2013. Did we meet the goal? Did we not meet the goal? And I think a lot of times by the time we get the data back, we forget that piece because we're just so busy on what can we do to fix it now. And so we're moving through, and we never really go back. And this is very telling. Number one, it validates the hard work of our teachers. Because if we really concentrated in an area, you'll see pockets where, oh, yes, we did that. We were in IQMS school, and so our highest gains were in science, which is an area to celebrate. And actually, we were one of the highest gains in science across the state. And I think it's up to us as administrators, lead teachers in your building to celebrate yourself, but with your team, with your people who are that. And I think sometimes we get so busy in all the things we have to fix and all the things we have to do to get ready for the next season of testing that we forget to celebrate what we did well and reflect on what we didn't do so well in, which may become our new learning. So these next few images are just, data doesn't have to be pretty and neat and clean. I'm kind of a nerdy person, and so I like to give it, in clean format. And this is our school. And if I send this to you, it'll be a little easier to read. This is by grade level and categories. Over here, it's just hand things where we charted out numbers in literary text, informational text, geometry, by the strands on that big raw data file, principles that you get from the State Department that says this is how your kids did, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. All those are those subheadings where you can see how they do by strands. Some of you are probably in districts where you're fortunate enough to have people to do that for you. If you are, consider yourself blessed. If you're not, teachers don't care how they get it. We just got to get it to them. So my teachers, I give them lots of data. Other formats, this is a grade by grade comparison. This is our ESA formula. Giving that to them, making them see it. I can own it. It can be mine, and I can say, we're going forward and we're going to improve in all these areas. But I am only one. If I can't get my teachers to buy in and I can't get them to have ownership, not just of their data, but of the whole school's data. So is my art teacher on board? Is my health teacher on board? Is my special ed teacher on board? Are my math teachers on board in owning the whole school data, and what part can we contribute? So in the beginning, as principals, as heads of departments, as teachers, this is a particular teacher's data. We don't tell teachers how they have to analyze it. We just give it to them. We print it in all kinds of formats because some people like to read left to right and some people want to read top to bottom. So any kind of format that we can dream up. I have a leadership team that consists of myself, 2 other administrators, 2 master teachers who teach for me, but the majority of their time is spent in professional development, and then 4 mentor teachers who carry a full teaching load. And they're like lead teachers who will support other teachers. So I'll ask them, how do you want to see your data? And if one of them says, I'd like to see it like this, then we give it to everybody like that. And then I'll ask another one, well, what makes sense to you? Because the math people don't always see it like the ELA people. So trying to figure out how different people. Because I was guilty for a long time as a principal of giving people the data the way I understood it, okay? Because my mind works one way and I understood it that way, so I just assumed, and we all know what happens when you do that everybody understood it that way. And so make the teachers own it, and they come up with their own systems.
One thing that I want to say right off that Brenda did with us is she did give us these opportunities to sit, and time is always a valuable thing for us as teachers, as leaders, as administrators. But giving teachers time to look at each other's data and talk about it and specifically name students, that's where you start to own it. And that's where you start to make those connections in the classrooms. Not only just as teachers, but they know the kids' names. And when they come to the room, they're looking for those children to interact with them and to kind of follow up on what's going on and talk to them and get feedback even from the kids on what's going on. So all of this is really important, and if you can find a way to take that time to allow teachers to work through this, that is very important.
And if you go back to your ESA formulas, which is what's driving all of us now, that's going to tell you your subgroups. So what subgroups, and the larger the school, generally the more subgroups that you have. So what subgroups are you, is it males in science? Is it African Americans in math? Is it girls in social studies? Where is your gap? And then, as a team, what can we do to address the needs of those people? I didn't grow up as a male. So I don't really know what it's like to be a male learning in school. I also didn't grow up in an African American home, so I don't know what that's like. I also didn't grow up in a very affluent home, so I don't know what that's like either. Many times we're teaching and leading people that we never live the lives that they live, and so we have to step out of our comfort zone to figure that out. But you can never give teachers enough data, just more examples of how they're doing data. And the last thing I want to say about data is you have them reflect and analyze, and in a little bit when you walk around you'll see some evidence of that, of how they did last year, okay? So did I go up? Did I go down? What was my strength? What was my weakness? And that's what these are, just analyzation by content areas and the strands. But then you give them the kids that are currently sitting in their classroom. They really can't do anything about the people that have already left them, but they need to be validated in that, oh God, I sucked, or I did a great job, or, and this is what we find a lot in our school, in science and social studies especially, that last little unit that they're like blah, 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 trying to teach it right before testing comes because they didn't pace themselves. That's the weakest area. It's not necessarily their personal weakest area, it's just the weakest of where our kids did because they didn't thoroughly teach it, because they were lesson structure and pacing was off, and they were just cramming it in the 11th hour in May when middle schoolers are hormonal and they really don't care what you're saying. Just get me out the door. So having reflections like that, but then give them this year's data, the kids that are actually sitting in their class, and make them analyze it like this too. In my first period, where is the strength? Where is the weakness? Who has the most room to grow? Who am I going to have to stay on top of because they're already at an 890? Our kids couldn't write those extended response answers at the level at which that we were seeing those exemplars, and so we needed to get them to that point. And so our first thought was, we're going to work on writing. We're going to work on going back into the text, finding evidence, justifying your answer, increasing like that. Well, then we realized that our kids can't even talk about that. They can't dialogue like that. So we came up with the ideas that we wanted to work on, and then while working with our leadership team, we set goals. By the end of the year, this many not met will be met, this many met will be exemplary, this many exemplary will grow, and then in both, and we focus really in every area up here. It just shows you math and reading, and then we come up with what's called an annual cluster goal. We're a TAP school, so we have cluster meetings. Many of you run PLCs. You run learning teams, same thing, and that we're going to work on demonstrating proficiency in teaching productive dialogue, purposeful reading, and meaningful writing strategies. So as a part of TAP, we're now using our IQMS strategies throughout our school to go from there. So
okay, if you will, pair up with one other person, shoulder partner, and talk about the 5 things that you thought were important. Let them talk about their 5 things and come up with 3 of those that you together feel are the most important ones that summarize or are your most important takeaways from this article.
All right, so someone tell me what you're supposed to do. And this is a good way to help when obviously we're assuming that many of you know this kind of stuff, but when you're teaching it to kids, it's a lot more difficult than, 5-3-1. And you have to break it up into chunks. So you may do the 5 one week, and then the 3 the next week, and then the 1 later on, or one day, next day. So you've all read the article, you got your 5 most important points, or most of you do, and that's okay. You're going to have kids in your class that don't, So now what are you to do? And then come up with 3. So with your list and your list, y'all are going to come up with a consensus of 3 most important points.
Okay. I think everybody's kind of gotten something. I want to hear out from each of the 2 groups. What did you come up with as your one-word phrase or sentence that sums up this article?
You'll have a spokesperson.
You have a spokesperson?
Well, our one word was feedback.
Okay.
It was. And our sentence or our all-encompassing phrase, I think you guys worded it better,
was authentically, developmentally guiding feedback.
Okay.
Yeah, say that louder.
Authentically, developmentally guiding feedback.
Okay, good. And what was yours?
Informative assessment provides teachers and students with feedback to guide instruction and learning.
Okay, good.
So do you think they're both the same? You basically said the same thing.
Why do you think we chose this article? in relationship to what we've been talking about.
Because you talked about feedback as far as the data goes that can help drive instruction.
Exactly, and we kind of infused some things with our teachers on assessments because we wanted them to see that really throughout all the things we've been doing and we continue to do, we're informally and formally assessing all the time. And we wanted them to see that it could be qualitative, it could be quantitative. And so this was a great way. We kind of pulled in some professional reading for them. Depending on the setting, we could jigsaw the article, but it just had so much information in this one that we just chose to do it this way because our teachers really liked the whole article.
I tell my staff every year, you can't wait around for PASS. PASS is the autopsy. Right?
That's it. That's it.
It's an autopsy. And you can't do strategies for the sake of doing strategies. You gotta assess, are they
Right.
effective or are they not? Because if they're not, you don't need to keep doing them. But if they are effective, keep doing them. And so it's a way to help them get out of that autopsy mentality. Oh, let's wait on pass score, see if we get a flag, see if we get an F, see if we get an A, or whatever. You know, you have to learn to assess along the way. And then there's no surprise when the autopsy comes back, you know.
I think too, it's
So going back to this strategy here, think for a moment, all the different content areas in your buildings. What are some ways that you might could use this strategy in your buildings? Maybe with students, teachers, PLCs. What are some things you might could see being done?
You could use this strategy with with your staff, whether you're looking at bullying, discipline, activities, transition time, school culture.
Good.
Do you think you could use this analyzing data?
Yes.
And you think you would see what was important to people too, you know, because my five important points of looking at data may be very different than your 5 important points. Our ELA people use it a lot with determining theme in, you know, things that they're reading. But and you'll see when we get up and walk around in a
They get
minute,
into
you'll
main
see how
idea.
it's used in math and other areas too. Any teachers have an idea of how they might could use it in their class?
We're just doing it the same kind of strategy by having articles related to whatever topic you're doing.
Right.
And then we're saying advisor, advisee sign as well, things of the kind.
And I think if you're a math teacher and you're teaching a new concept, so like, and there has to be some direct instruction. It can't all be everybody get in a group and let's do an experiment. I mean, at some point, kids reach an age where they just don't know the math and somebody's got to teach it to them, you know? So if you teach, then from your lecture, could they come up with the most important point and then 3 and then 1, you know? And then that's going to give you a clear idea as a teacher, did they get the gist of what I was saying or were they way off base? So.
And I did a lot of that with the students that I taught this past year, is to get them to drill down to that, because they suffered with difficulty trying to summarize things, trying to find the main idea. And so the ELA teacher, she was the other master teacher, we teamed this group of kids. These were our gift from Brenda. And so that kind of helped them to understand. And yeah, no, it wasn't. We did think they were a gift. There's some examples back here of how it was possibly used. One of the math teachers teaching students about integers, and we know that's a very difficult concept for students. She did a thing and she used sticky notes to kind of help them with their process because they struggled with this at first. In the end, she used this and the reflection piece and the feedback she got from the students where they did their personal free write about the strategy was very impressive. I could not find them to bring to you, but these were troubled students who had some issues with discipline. They had some academic issues. They had some outside issues that prevented sometimes them from being always on task in the classroom. And comments were made by students like, this made things so much better. We were able to work as a group. We were able to complete the task. We were able to all decide what was most important without getting into an argument. And this was the kinds of the feedback we got from the kids. If you look over here, as you walk around in a little bit, there's an example from the chorus teacher. She used it in chorus, gathering up 5 most important parts of the piano, and then they kind of dwindled down from that. But that was her 5 piece for the 5-3-1. And then there's also a thing there where it was used in a social studies classroom. There's a little thing where they had sort of a STEM completion, and the kids had their 5 ideas, and then they worked in on their 3, and you can see the 3 on the sentence strips, and then they came up with one big idea about the Civil War was caused by. So those were several examples there that we used. Some of you can start over here. It's fine, because we've got stuff all around. We'll rotate. This right in here is where, when we started with bounce cards across the building, we gave the teachers this, and they would name kids who they felt gave low, medium, and high responses, and then they would actually write down what the kids were saying, their responses, and then they'll tell why they thought that was a low, medium, and high. And then they brought it back to cluster, and we took it a step further. We listed the characteristics, and so then they had kind of like a rubric to go by as they go back, and they track them further on. One other thing we did is we do a lot of videoing of the conversations, or the teachers modeling the strategies or using the strategies, and we had some video clips that we used, and maybe that one just didn't come through, but we used it of 3 students using the bounce card strategy, and we tracked kids, and we talked about their responses, and then we looked at where were they still having needs. This child was not really using listening skills, did not make eye contact. And so what could we do as a plan of action when we go back into the room to work on this to make sure that that student is more actively listening and utilizing the strategy better. And so those are some notes where we did some of that. And then this is where we used, teachers came back into cluster, and this was another way we tracked data on kids. We gathered characteristics of high, medium, and low. And then when we see teachers here, then we talk about, well, what can we do to move the students to these different levels? And those are conversations that we sometimes have with them in clusters. Do y'all have any questions on this?
So that is Laura's 5 different classes that she teaches. And she has 7 high.
That is each week in this strategy.
Each week?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We changed up colors, and we started with, we go black, red, blue, and then the last 2 weeks we're down on the next thing. This lady ended up having to be out on surgery, so she, and this was another where we did tracking on another set of strategies with special ed. So, and this was really helpful for the teachers because they could look at trends. We could look at there and we'd say, okay, what do you see with the numbers? What's happening here? And they could see if they were stagnant, or if they were, certain people were moving, or if the whole group was moving kids.
That 3rd week moved forward from the low to the medium. Middle.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep.
And then that way.
So each time it looks like they're moving here, but
Exactly.
not so much here.
Right, and so then our conversation might have been with them, well, what's preventing us from moving more here? And that may be something we go back and field test. She was my mentor in that group, and so I might go back with her and field test what we talked about with her kids, and then we'll come back and teach it the next week. And these were where literally they were naming kids because those were kids they were tracking maybe that week, or those were students they had seen the previous week that needed to be moved, and what were they still seeing with that. And so when we got the student responses, you know, that could generate a conversation. Somebody might say, well, I would have thought that might have been a high. What about that statement or that response caused you to still say that student was a medium? And then it goes back into knowing your students.
And I would be sitting back, I would do it with them. But I'm not Because you couldn't get them all. the
These are
same day.
teachers. These are teachers, what they bring back into to the cluster meetings
But I'm
about
talking
what they're
if I
seeing.
tried to do note-taking on a student.
We can't do everyone.
I wouldn't.
No,
That's
we-
what I'm saying. I wouldn't be
We
able to.
choose students. The teachers will choose students based on their data, based on whatever the strategy is, skill, like with 531, it's summarizing. Those students that she wanted to check on. What we did here initially was they would, as they were going around and they would hear kids talking, they would name the students, okay? And then here were their responses. And then why did I say that this was a low? Well, here were the things that I saw. Well, no use of the stems. They couldn't really relate to the other person. Okay, so that backs up why I chose that one as a low, and then a medium and the high. Then they bring them back, and we generated a list of characteristics, so to use kind of like a rubric. And then they could assess their students from there. This is where we do a lot of videoing.
Because I was going to say I couldn't do this on 26
Oh
students.
no, and we don't do that. We don't do that. And it'll be different students maybe each week. But we videoed some students in a conversation using bounce cards. And we tracked. Several of us did it together, and we tracked different students. And then what we did was we heard exactly what they were saying. We wrote it down, and we thought, well, this student really had no listening skills. He never looked the others in the eye.
All right, let me interrupt you. Okay, if that was a poor skill for this student in this class, did y'all track this same student in some of the other classes to see how
Some
they
people
did?
did.
And if they still had the
Right.
skills to see if it related to
Yeah.
this one particular.
Yes, and there were lots of conversations, not necessarily in cluster, but outside of cluster. It generated a lot of conversations, even at the lunch table, in the halls. So this was this teacher's plan of action for this student based on that they were going to go back and try to refine. And these were just where we did some videos. This is where teachers would bring back characteristics, maybe trends they saw overall, and then we would have a short discussion. Okay, well, we're seeing all of this. What can we do specifically to move to here? What can we change up? So those were kind of the things that we would do with that information. A lot of power in things that they would see and then they would bring out.
Are these numbers in reference to a student or?
They were students in their classrooms, and over the week, as they did the strategy over and over, they would pick a few students each day and listen to them or interact with them, and they would categorize them as high, medium, or low based on the characteristics that they developed or the rubric they developed. And then each week we would change up a color and they would track their data. So at any given point, we might say, okay, take a look at what you see thus far. What do you see happening with our data?
Now, do we have one of these in our package?
I think
Yes,
so.
ma'am, we do.
But basically, like for each, let's say when they went to a particular unit or concept, they would sit down together and come up with the characteristics. Okay.
This was our rubric for bounce cards.
Okay, so this is checking your use of
This was bounce
strategies.
card. It's always, we use it with the strategies.
Okay.
And tell me what these mean here.
These were, once we saw this was our rubric. And so, for example, first week she had four students that were high, she had 5 that were medium, and 7 that were low. And they would name these kids. And then, of course, as you move on through the strategy, you could get a special ed. They were able to get a lot of them here, but a lot of them were newer students this year, and so then they had to work hard to move some into this category. The newer group they got had a lot more needs, a lot of different needs.
Yeah,
I'll say.
when they did this, then did they try to talk to the students
Oh, yes.
that were low?
They would have conversations with them, and they might say, Jaheen, this is what you're saying. Let's work on this today. Let's see if we can get you so that you can give a more complete answer instead of maybe just one word.
We have would you hand to?
Yeah, she said her name.
Sweet
I'm like,
babies.
oh.
Sweet baby.